Hello, 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 and welcome to today's episode of Her Version. This podcast is dedicated to sharing stories of struggle and triumph, a platform that allows individuals to tell their truth in order to inspire and uplift others. For those of you that are new to this podcast and like content like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button, follow, like, and share. I am your host, Sabrina Victoria. Let's jump right in. Hello, and thank you for joining us for this episode of Her Version. This platform is built on storytelling and the understanding that many times our greatest learning experiences come from listening to other people's stories. Today, I'm speaking with an amazing woman named Katherine Polsinelli. Oh my gosh, I was just talking about how awesome your last name is, and I just butchered that. Polsinelli. Kat got pregnant young, which led her down a whirlwind of focus issues, anger, and flashbacks. Taking back control of her life at the age of 26, she bought her first car, her first home, and learned to put herself first. She left corporate behind and followed her passion of real estate and business consulting, stepping into her potential over and over again. Over the years, she now surrounds herself with powerful people, continues to test her limits, and makes the time to show up for the things that matter. One of those being her family. Excited to chat with the amazing female Miss Kat. How are you?
Hello. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And I do want to notate that Kat is actually part of her mastermind. So excited to have her in so many different areas of her nation. Which is where the Her Version podcast resides. So excited to have you here. Thanks for taking some time in your day to sit down and chat with me.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, and all of the things. Can you tell us where you're calling in from first before we jump in?
I am actually in Middle Tennessee, so just outside of Nashville, for anyone that's curious.
Born and raised?
No, I am actually from Florida.
What part?
Winter Park.
Winter Park.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, I know where that is. Where is that?
It's just above Orlando.
Yes.
Well, at least it used to be.
Why is it called Winter Park?
Honestly, I'm not sure.
Wow, that's so interesting. Yes, I feel like, well, yeah, if you've been to Orlando, you've probably driven or flown through there. But yeah, I've seen that. I've seen that on a map. And I thought that to myself, why is it called Winter Park? Anyways, I'm so excited to be here and hang out with you and share all of the goodies, first of all, of your journey, of your story, and then also what you're doing now, because I know you're doing some freaking really cool, rad stuff for all of the humans in your community at the moment. But first, I want to jump into your past and talk about anything you want to talk about, but I want to hear a story that changed your life, kind of a pivot that happened in your life, and then what you learned from that change or pivot.
Ooh, okay. Well, there was a lot of change in my life. I think the first biggest change would have been deciding to keep my child at the age of 16. That was a huge pivoting point because I had plans of going to college and doing softball and all this stuff. So that was a huge pivoting point in my life, was making the decision to keep my oldest son, I have two now. I left the school that I was at and went to an alternative school so that I could graduate early. And that way I was able to start working in college and provide for my kid. Because at the time that I actually got pregnant with my son, my school had one of the highest rates of pregnancies at that time. So apparently it was a baby booming year. And a lot of people that I knew or that I was around were either not keeping the child or giving them to their parents to raise. And so when I sat down and had the conversation with my parents, I was very, very firm on, you will not raise my child. I will find a job that includes taking him with me, and I'll make it work. So at the age of 16 and moving forward, like I paid for everything when it came to my son.
Wow. What happened to his father?
He was in the picture for on and off the first year. So we graduated together, and then things got really, really rocky. And I don't know, I was young. He was young. I kind of went one direction. He didn't follow up. I met somebody else. And so we left it alone.
No kidding. Totally lost contact, or you still kind of know where he's at?
No, so actually we lost contact until the age of, he was turning 15 and he showed up.
Wow. We have a comment here, Unchained Empath. This is Brittany, who's actually also part of her mastermind. You want to read this out loud?
Sure. I just cannot imagine being responsible enough at that age to get my life together like that. How incredible. Thank you.
Yeah. How did you do that? What was the mindset behind that?
I think it was just, I've always been a go-getter kind of person. I was like that in sports and everything else, and seeing everyone else around me, like I said, that were my age, that were kind of continuing to live their life and like handing their kid off to someone else, really frustrated me. I was also the oldest. I have two younger sisters. So it was always kind of like trying to take care of everybody anyways, even though my mom was there with us full time. So it just, I don't know, it was a really big thing to me to really take charge in my life because I had made that decision. So I worked to find the alternative school. I had to do an interview with them in order to even be accepted into it. And the whole reason that I went to that school was because they offered daycare during the day. So I was able to actually take my son with me for $1 a day and pay for daycare while I continued my education. And for your Unchained Empath, I'll add another stick to that. I also breastfed my son at the age of 16 for the first year and a half.
How did you do that?
So I would get up in the middle of the night, feed on one side, pump on the other several times. And then the ladies that ran the daycare at the school were gracious enough to allow me to use their back room at lunchtime. And so I would go in, I would feed him at lunch, and I would pump another one. And so that way he had a bottle for that afternoon. And that was my cycle.
Wow. I feel like a lot of men and women listening would be surprised by the tenacity here. Was there a moment at any point, like 16, 17, or even older, where you were just like tired? Or because you're so young, like I just can't, like I got pregnant at 20 and I thought that was young. And there was moments where I was just like, fuck this. Like I cannot do this. Like for real, like not wanting to keep him, wanting to throw him out a window, wanting to leave him at the fire station, wanting to run away, like feeling sorry for myself. Were you just like boom, 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 all the things? Or were there some moments of like darkness?
I definitely feel that there were always moments. One of the hardest ones, to be honest, that I really hit was while I was still pregnant, because at that time, obviously I looked really young. And so I got a lot of really weird faces. I remember having people like snag their kids and like drag them away from me in the stores. So I remember like coming home and just bawling because like, I was like this thing to stay away from, right? So that was really hard. I was very blessed though at that time because I was very heavily involved in my church. I also ran a Sunday class with children between the ages of 4 and 5 at the time that I got pregnant. And so I actually brought all the parents in, and my family kept all the kids, and I had a conversation with the parents. I let them know what was going on because I was raised Catholic. So that's a huge no-no in that faith. So I let all the parents know, and I told them that they did not agree with me teaching their children because of that weird conversation. Like I completely understood, and you were free to do whatever you wanted to do. I had one person that took their child out of my class, out of 20 kids, and then 3 of the parents actually ended the Sunday school year with throwing me a baby shower. And so that was kind of like a really big like push for me, and knowing that it wasn't what I was thinking, which was that I was some monster. And that was a huge thing for me, was really showing that I could be different than what a lot of people were seeing, which again was continuing to be a teenager while their baby was raised by somebody else. So that was a really like huge pushing point for me. I mean, there were nights of frustration where I would get like, 3-4 hours of sleep and have to go to school. I babysat in the evening so that I could take my son with me. So sometimes I'd work until like 10 o'clock at night. But I don't know, there was that determination to prove a lot of people wrong at that time, because a lot of people around had very big views on teenagers being pregnant. So oh, I can't hear you, Sabrina.
Thank you. I know that you now, where you are now in your life, are familiar with or have dove into personal development or growth mindset. At what point during this journey, was it just a few years ago, or, has it been a while, where you kind of started to dive into your mental and emotional health?
So I would definitely say probably I was introduced to it probably about 4.5 years ago, probably close to 5. And to be honest, the real reason that I kind of got into the personal development side and learning about myself was because after having my son and graduating and working full time and going to college and all that, I also made a choice that, I kind of had it all figured out. So I ended up moving in with a boyfriend at that time, which ended up being an 8-year abusive relationship. So during that time, I had a second son. I got away about the age of 26. And that's when I kind of started over. And I was so focused on starting over and not becoming a statistic, and making sure that I raised my sons, because I had 2 boys, right, to not be that way, that again, I put myself to the side until, like I said, about 4.5, 5 years ago, it kind of really hit me hard that like things weren't adding up, right? And like, even though I had a great medical career and I was, my kids were doing good, and I was, I had my first house and I bought a car and all these things, there was like still this really huge disconnect. And I'd been in and out of therapy, but I didn't feel like it was really helping. And funny enough, I was actually invited to do a free facial, which I'd never had, for someone that was on a mom's group that had to do like so many things to get her esthetician degree. So I opted to go and check it out for the heck of it. I was like, why not? I can't pay myself to get pampered. And she is actually the one that started talking about manifestation and all these things, and introduced me to this Facebook group. And I was like, what are you talking about? And I don't know, I just kind of like, I found a place and I felt like so enthralled in it. Like I just wanted to learn everything, right? And then that's kind of when things really started popping up. And then I read a book about codependency. And when I read that book after getting in the group, like everything just kind of clicked. And I was like, oh, wow. I have been shoving everything that I've gone through my entire life into a box, put it to the side, thought it was going to just like disappear and go away, when in reality it's continuing to come up in my day-to-day life, in my relationship, in the way that I deal with my kids, like everything. So that's kind of what really pushed me to start that journey. You're muted again.
What kind of thoughts went through your mind when you first learned about codependency? Do you remember that?
Yeah. So the book that I read, and I wish I could remember the name of it off the top of my head, it's just been a while, but it had all these different stories in it. And a lot of them were around like people that dealt with a spouse that had alcoholism or drug abuse problems and things like that. But when I read it, the scenario itself of like the reason why somebody stayed with it, or the reason why like someone felt that need to take care of someone, right? Like that's the part of the story that I actually hung on to. And every time I would read that story, no matter what the background was, I could relate to it in some way, or I had done it and I knew it. And so like I remember reading that book and being like pissed off and frustrated and so upset, because here I thought that I got away from my ex, even though I was still dealing with stuff in court. I went through 4.5 years of that stuff. It just hit on a different level. And I think it's because I was also ready to dive into that piece of me, where before I didn't want to have a conversation about it. I didn't talk about my story. I didn't really tell a lot of people. I kept it to myself. Like I felt like it was like such a weird thing, or like people would be like, oh God, I can't believe you allowed yourself to go through that. Because most people that knew me prior to being in an abusive relationship, I was known by everybody. Like I love sports. I was involved highly in high school. Even when I went to the alternative school, like I graduated salutatorian, president of student council. Like I was always in things. So I didn't want to have to explain to people, because I didn't know how to explain to them of why I allowed myself to be in that situation and why I stayed that long. Like those were questions I did not want to deal with. So, so reading that book really gave me a different perspective on viewing the situation that I was in.
Yeah. Was it possibly called Should I Stay or Should I Go?
No.
No. Okay. Those, I'm telling you though, if people who are dealing with in a relationship where it just isn't feeling right, like it's just feeling off and you're not feeling the love and it seems like there's a roller coaster, diving into a book that talks about codependency changes everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely everything. And I think both men and women deal with that, that I guess issue or challenge, but predominantly women, 100%. When you think about, when you started to take back your power, when you were 26 years old and you started to just kind of look and you're like, F this crap. I'm like taking back my life and my power and my money and all the things. It's easy for us to say it now, right? It's like, yeah, no big deal. Sometimes I tell my story and it just sounds like it was such a breeze, but there's so much like darkness and tears and agony and despair that goes along with that. But when you think about the transition that you slowly made from one cat to another cat, do you remember, or can you talk briefly about some of the steps that you remember taking, whether it was physically or mental, emotional, or communication, or whatever it was? What were a couple of the things that you did to make that transition? Because it's not just overnight. It's not like you just snapped your finger and you're like, okay, I'm a different person. There's like a thing that you have to like do, that you have to go through. Do you remember any steps that you could highlight for us as far as your capacity to move in that direction?
I think the biggest thing, when I first got out and kind of started over, was letting go of everything that was attached to everything. I know that probably doesn't make a lot of sense, but I had tons of emotions. Like I remember, like you were saying, that those dark pieces, I remember crying myself to sleep every night because I had been with someone for so long and slept beside someone and had that, at least that person, that I didn't know what to do to sleep by myself. So that was a huge thing. And even though like I hated that person, right, I wanted nothing to do with them, it was just the nurturing feeling, or that feeling of being needed by somebody. So that's when I dropped a lot of that and went into what my kids needed. So my kids were a huge piece for me, when it came to kind of stepping out of that piece. What I will say is just one thing that is wrong, that I feel like I did was, in those very first years, but 26, 27, I focused everything around proving that I could be different, which is great to an extent. And the reason I say that is because I worked 40 to 50 hours a week. I took care of my kids. I would put myself back in college in the evenings to prove that I could get my degree that I've been trying to get for years. And on the weekends, I literally spent my entire time with my kids out somewhere doing something, making up for all the things that we didn't get to do when I was in my relationship, because we weren't really allowed to go a lot of places unless like everyone was together and there weren't a lot of people around and things like that. So I honed in on all of those pieces that were missing in my life and made that like the goal, right? One thing that I wish I would have done was made time for me. That was one thing that I didn't do. The only time that I could say like I made time for me, which I didn't really, was after I dropped my kids off on the bus. I would go work out because I had to get my mind right so that I could make it to work, right, and work a 10-hour shift. So I would go work out, go to work. I wouldn't even take a lunch break. Like I would spend so much time enthralled in everything that I was doing and like keeping myself busy because I was so afraid. And I didn't know it then, but I know it now. I was so afraid to be with myself. I was so afraid to be with my own thoughts and to deal with anything that was going to come up that I just like shoved everything down. So I kept myself so freaking busy that I literally was just exhausted all the time. And the more projects that I could take on myself and the more things I could do with my kids or do for my family or whatever it was, is what I did to the point of exhaustion. And so I wish that I would have taken that time to really like focus on me and deal with those emotions then versus waiting all the way until I hit my 30s, right?
Yeah. Wow. I 100% agree with everything you're saying. What's the difference between your story and you saying it should have maybe gone a little bit differently? And then the whole thought process of when you're by yourself and you have children, you have to just do whatever it takes. Like, where's the balance? Like, what would the ideal balance have been? Because I hear what you're saying, and I was like, girl, same. But the way that I tell my story is you have to.
Mm-hmm.
You have to.
Yeah.
So where's the balance between the two for you?
I think that while for a lot of us, right, like in that moment, yes, like we do whatever it takes and our focus is fully on them. But when we hit those points that I know all of us do, when the healing tries to come back up, like for me, 1 year to the date that I had my ex arrested, I started having these issues while I was working where like I couldn't breathe. Didn't realize they were panic attacks back then, but apparently I was having panic attacks. I went to a heart person. I had to have an EKG. I had to wear a heart monitor. Nobody could figure out what's wrong with me. And he's like, everything's great. Everything's good. Like if you've ever had stress, like that might be an issue. That was like a smack in the face indicator that like you should probably deal with your shit, right?
Oh, okay.
Where I should have taken that time to start to learn about that, right? To continue to like start reading. I didn't start reading until I was 31 on development and healing. The reason that I say that for me, I wish it would have been slightly different is because of the effect that it had on my kids, right? I was an unhealed person still trying to grow up, raising children that were unhealed in a situation that they had been through.
Yeah.
And while I had them in counseling and things like that, we were not healing together.
Got it.
Because my focus was not at that point. My focus was still back here, right? And that was protecting myself from everything I had been through by pushing everything else forward.
Yeah. So a lot of what you're saying, and I'm going into detail here because there's moms listening, there's single moms all over the place that are relating to what you're saying. And they're either going in one direction or the other. Either they're going in the direction of do all the things, not wanting to be a statistic. I can totally relate to that. Or they go in the opposite direction of giving up, playing victimhood and, you know, relying on the system to take care of them and their children and whatever else. And not that either side is wrong. However, right or wrong. However, in your situation, it sounds as if to me, there's not a whole lot of time to do that reading or to do that self-care. So which of the things would you give up? Like, which of the things would you not have done so that you could have fit in some me time or some reading of the books or mental capacity? Like, where would the time have come from?
So I think the time could have come from me creating boundaries.
Ooh, okay. Tell us more.
And the reason I say that is because I became the yes person.
Okay.
I became the people pleaser. So yes, while I had a very busy job and while I had a schedule with my kids and I used my weekends to be with them, I did not tell other people no. So if my family needed absolutely anything, if my sisters needed absolutely anything, if the school for my kids needed absolutely anything, it didn't matter how busy I was. If my work needed absolutely anything, I was all in, right? I remember I worked so much that if my kids got sick, I would bring them to my doctor's office and put them in a room on the other side that we had so that I could take care of them and still do my job.
Wow.
There were no boundaries. There was no, I don't have the capacity for this. There was no, I can't do this. This comes first. I didn't have that ability. And I think that if I would have created that ability and I would have started putting those boundaries out there, even if they were small, right, that would have created the space for me to then be able to be with myself, because I would have taken my lunches when I had an hour and a half instead of finding things to do in the office that were not necessarily my responsibility. I could have read books at that time, right? In the evenings when my kids went to bed and all of my schoolwork was done, because a lot of times I would do it at the beginning of the week so that I had that week in case something happened. I could have made time for that, right? Instead of I'm always the one that will cook, or, oh, I'm happy to come over and help you do something that you need, right? Boundaries is what really would have come into play. It's not necessarily that I needed to make the time. I could have found the time, but I was in such a mode of doing so many things for other people. I did not have the time for myself.
Wow. Totally get it. 100%. And I think so many people listening can totally relate to that on multiple levels. When you think about your journey from beginning to where you are now, what would you say is the number one lesson that you've learned about life?
I would say the number one lesson is that we all go through things for some reason or another. And unfortunately, for some of us, that involves our children as well. And that's because our children are meant to go through things too, no matter how much we want to protect them. And we have to choose and teach our children to choose to use that lesson as a way to propel yourself, or use that lesson as a way to hold yourself back.
Ooh, tell us more about that.
For a lot of people that I've met, especially when it comes to trauma, that is kind of like the make or break of your life. Kind of like you were saying earlier, right? We either kind of move forward because it's a we have to, or we just sink into this deep, dark area and lose ourselves. But we have to make that choice, right? I do feel like people go through things because if you can find the lesson out of it, it's going to help you help others that maybe don't have the strength. And so for me specifically, you know, when people would ask, why do you think you went through that? Right? Why do you think that you were punished? That was a big one. I don't feel like I was punished. Do I wish that it could have been different for my children? Yes. However, I made a promise to myself to use what I had been through, since trauma is such a huge thing on this planet that most people don't talk about. I wanted to use my voice to be the person that could speak for others, to be that one to come out and say, it's okay. Right.
Yeah.
For those that don't know how to be vulnerable, or being vulnerable is too painful. So that's my lesson. And I got to break the cycle with my kids, because they now are learning how to handle things at a young age that I didn't know, because my family didn't know that either, right? You only know what you know. We weren't taught those kinds of things. I get to now teach my kids that at a younger age, so that as they grow, hopefully they can use those things that I've taught them and start learning how to get through things in their life a lot easier than it was for me. So my hope and my thoughts are that they're going to be able to propel themselves forward in the years to come a lot faster than I was, where I struggled and I had to figure it out. And now in my 30s, am just now learning the lessons that I'm hoping to teach them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that that's one of the most valuable gifts that you can give your children, is just that, exactly what you're talking about. It's not toys or the latest or the greatest. It's those lessons, of communication, of boundaries. Definitely. I love that. I love your story. When you think about the transition from old Kate to new Kate, tell us one limiting belief. I know there's probably a few, but what is a limiting belief that you can share with us that you had to start to really look at and toss in the trash?
I think one of the biggest ones that I dealt with, that I feel like still occasionally comes up, is knowing who I am. So my limiting belief is more around, do you really think you can do that? Do you really think you're that person? And what I realized was that limiting belief really came from the relationship that I was in, and constantly being beat down, constantly being told you can't do it, or constantly being told, well, what does that matter? Or what is the point? Right. So it was a huge thing for me, that I really had to work on, and realize that I can either keep listening to it and I can keep going in circles, or I can say, fuck it, excuse my language, and try it out and see what happens. I mean, I had already been through shit for 8 damn years. I mean, why not? What's the worst that can happen? I already know I'm not going to at least end up in that situation, because I already know what I don't like about it. So for me, it was really trusting in myself and not listening to that one thought of, what's the point? Why?
Yeah. What would be some advice that you'd give to single moms out there listening who are kind of floundering around and struggling with the whole victim mentality? They're coming to the intersection where they're recognizing it, they're seeing it, they're getting educated, but sometimes you want to hang on to your story. What would be some advice that you would give to those ladies who are looking to step into our side?
Oh Lord. So many things. If you know that you're at a crossroads where things are not adding up, and so the old things that you continue to tell yourself, deep in your heart is bullshit, but for some reason you keep wanting to say it because it makes sense, write it down. Write it down on a piece of paper and that I want you to go back and I want you to read it to yourself out loud and feel how uncomfortable and icky that shit feels. And when it does, then I want you to write down what you want to say in your head and what you want your thoughts to tell you.
I love that. Wait, say it again. Say it again. That was really good.
So take your thoughts that you have.
Negative thoughts.
Because a lot of us, we all have them, right? It's always there. But take those thoughts, take those words, whatever it is, and just write it down. You may not even realize it's a limiting belief, but write it down and then say it out loud. Because the interesting thing is about saying things out loud is you can feel the difference, right? So someone told me, a mentor a long time ago, was like, do me a favor, put your hand on your heart and say somebody else's name. So like, I am Sabrina. You could say,
I am Kat.
Does it feel weird?
Yes.
Okay. That's how you know it's not yours. So by writing those negative statements out and saying them out loud, you can feel how it makes you feel. You have to sit in quiet. You can't have a bunch of crap going on around you, right? But you can feel how that makes you feel. And so that there is your one-way ticket to being able to tell yourself that whatever you're saying to me right now is bullshit because I just read it out loud and I feel like shit. And then write down the things that you want to say.
Yeah.
The things that you want to feel and see how that makes you feel. And those are the things that you need to start saying to yourself.
Absolutely brilliant. That's great. So simple. So simple, but huge impact. I want to take a moment real fast to acknowledge those watching live. Thank you so much for being here and hanging out with Kat and I while we chit chat. And yes, mic drop for sure. I agree with that. Thank you. Those of you watching on the replay, make sure that you hashtag replay wherever you are watching us at so that we can show you some love wherever you're at. But I want to ask Kat, because I know that you have so much going on in your world right now as far as building community and, working in consulting and really helping people get to the next level in their life, AKA business. Tell us what you do. Tell us the name of your business, where we can find you. Tell us all the stuff.
Sure. So, Agent Services Plus is the name of the business. So you can find me online at Agent Services Plus. I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. You can find me at my website. Basically, what I enjoy doing is I love taking people from struggling in their business to skyrocketing. I don't even want to say thriving. I want to get you past the point of thriving. And a lot of times, yes, it comes down to some systems. Yes, it comes down to I have all these ideas and I want to implement these things, but I don't know how, to working with someone to get through the noise. And so that's what I enjoy doing, is taking all of that noise, shutting it down, and creating a plan of implementation to help you really focus on what's going to grow you in your business based on your personality. And a lot of that has to do with your mindset. And a lot of people don't think about that. So it's something that I really enjoy wrapping into working with people on their business, is having that conversation around your limiting beliefs and your struggles. Because if you can't acknowledge that, it doesn't matter what we put in place, you're eventually going to get bogged down and you're eventually going to want to quit because those limiting beliefs keep coming up. So it has to be a duality, in my personal opinion, when it comes to that. But that's what I enjoy doing, because I know that there are tons of people out there that are making money in their business, but don't know how to get to the next level, or don't know how to treat their business like a real business, right? They've been running it enough to make money and they're at least making ends meet, but they're ready to upstep.
Yeah, that's awesome. And where can people find you? Where do you hang out at on social media? What's your main place?
Actually, you'll find me on LinkedIn a lot. I've been on there a lot more lately. So that's probably the best way as far as messaging. I'm also on Facebook, so you can find me there as well. Instagram, not so much, but anything that's on my Facebook gets pushed over, so you'll see the same stuff. But I would definitely say LinkedIn is probably the biggest place. That and Facebook.
Beautiful. And is it under Kate Polsinelli?
So
Yeah,
Facebook,
sorry.
if you're looking for my business page, which is going to be Agent Services Plus, if not, you can find me personally, which is Katherine Polsinelli is
Catherine.
what it is. Cats for short. So I have enough letters in the name. So, or you can come join me on my podcast. So and listen to me talk with other entrepreneurs about their niches and their struggles and how they're going in their business and what they've learned and where they're going. So, and that's Real Chat with Kat. That's where you can find that.
I love it. Is that a .com or is that, where's that?
That is my podcast. That's the name of my podcast.
I love it. Very cool. What are your big dreams for your business?
Oh, besides helping as many people as I want to make a difference in people's lives. That's a huge piece for me. That's why speaking is another piece that I really want to introduce into my business as well, because I think I can spread that message a lot further. So my dream and vision for my business is to make a ginormous impact on people, especially those that have been through any type of trauma, and giving them that space to be able to talk about it so it becomes a story instead of it still running their lives in the background.
I love it. And then why do you do what you do?
Because I know what it's like to struggle. I know what it's like to ask for help and it still doesn't feel like it's doing much, even if it's coming from the best place, right? So I know what it's like to feel alone and to try and struggle through that. And my reason for doing it is to help other people that are in similar situations, whether it's business or personal, skip at least 10 steps that I wish I would have been able to take, right? So I want to propel people forward and help them learn those lessons a lot faster instead of doing like I had to and do a lot of self-finding and self-questioning for such a long time.
Yes, 100. That's the one thing that I love about the female community, especially in our community, Her Nation, is just women coming together, educating other women on just
Mhm.
this stuff that we just weren't taught. And it's not anybody's fault, right? It just wasn't like tangible. It just wasn't in our mothers or fathers or grandparents' faces for them to even know that it was a thing. So I love that we're coming together. We're sharing our inspirational stories. We're doing it different. We're breaking the cycles. We're rising in all of the things. And I so thank you for coming on and sharing some of your backstory and the tenacity that it took to get to where you are now. I think is just absolutely phenomenal. Any closing thoughts as we wrap up?
I would have to say that if you are struggling, focus on it, please. Don't put it in a box. Don't stuff it away. Especially, and I know that our women, we go through it a lot because we are nurturers. And so we want to nurture everybody else, but we forget to nurture ourselves. But I would also like to make that statement to our men out there as well, because I do feel like there's a stigma to our guys that guys aren't supposed to cry and you're supposed to stuff it down. And that is something I've really tried hard to teach my kids not to do, being men. So it's okay to be vulnerable regardless of gender. The stigma of standing up and holding your place is bull. And people are looking for authenticity.
Yeah, definitely. I know that's one thing that I worked on with my son too, who's 18, was I never told him not to cry. So I didn't over exaggerate the tears or coddle too much, but just allowing him space just to have whatever feelings he's having, but
Mm-hmm.
never saying like, you shouldn't do that or stop or anything like that, I think has definitely helped him. And even now, every once in a while, he gets over certain things or stuff that has happened. He gets a little teary eyed and shows that emotion, which I just think is so cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it. I love everything you're about. Thank you so much, Katherine, for being here, for hanging out with us, for sharing some of your story. Would love to have you on again at some point in the future. All of the things. If you resonated with Kat and all the goodness that she shared today, make sure you check out her website at agentservicesplus.com. Like she said, she's probably hanging out on LinkedIn and also on Facebook. Message her, reach out to her, do all of the things. As you can tell, she is a pleasant human. We love connecting people here on this platform in order to continue to rise. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you for watching her version. This community is expanding every single day and is filled with females who are striving to do better than they did yesterday. For those of you that are new to this podcast, make sure that you like, subscribe, and follow. If you have a story to share, reach out to me at hernation.life. I am your host, Sabrina Victoria, and I'm so grateful to be here sharing a platform that allows people to share their truth and inspire others. As always,